Hi, everyone. Welcome to a presentation put on by the Parent Information Center. My name is James Zegra. I'm a staff attorney for the Disability Rights Center in New Hampshire. And this presentation is going to focus on a new law that was passed last year in 2022 that helps students receiving transition services and special education services to register to vote and to get more civically engaged. So with that, I just want to introduce myself a little bit more formally. I work for the Disability Rights Center. We are a federally designated protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities. We're basically a small law firm, and we only represent folks with disabilities and help them in all manner of civil rights related disputes that center around their disability. So if you have any questions after this presentation, please feel free to reach out to the Disability Rights Center. I'd be happy to talk with any of you. So today, I'm going to talk about a couple different things. The first one is the change to the voting registration law and how it impacts special education. I'm going to touch on why voting is important and why it's important to be civically engaged. Then I'm going to talk about what to expect when somebody's going to the polling place for the first time, or if they're filling out an absentee ballot, what that looks like. And finally, I'll touch on some accommodations and best practices for new voters. So first of all, why is voting important? Well, voting is really important because it allows people to express their opinion about how they feel about certain issues. People vote because something is important to them, and this is the easiest way, it's the most efficient way to make your voice heard and to try to effectuate change to issues that are important to you. It's a chance to elect a candidate that is going to represent your views and help pass laws or legislation or regulations around issues that are important. And that could be related to things like education, healthcare, gun safety, or as strange as it sounds, TikTok. There are some legislators that want to ban TikTok because it's parent companies based in China. And other legislators don't want to ban TikTok. So if that is what is most important to you, that's fine. But the best way to keep your TikTok app is to make sure that you get out to the polling place and vote. So last year, the state of New Hampshire passed a new law, and the governor signed it into law, where special education students who either have a 504 plan or an IEP are able to discuss their civic participation and voting with their transition teams. So schools are now obligated to talk with students when they turn 17, or if they're older than that, if they've already turned 17 or 18 and they're still receiving education services. Schools are obligated to talk to these students about civic engagement, explain the process of voting, why it's important. And if a student expresses any sort of interest in voting or wanting to learn to vote, the schools can help out with that. And the crux of the new law is that it requires schools to have this discussion with all students who have a 504 plan or an IEP that are 17 years of age or older. So this is not a discretionary discussion. It's not something that schools can opt out of doing. They have to have this discussion. And they can, if a student expresses interest in it, what will happen is the school can add voting registration and helping a student register to vote as a short-term goal in either an IEP or a 504 plan. And if accommodations are required to have this done, that's fine too. But the goal is so that students can be more civically engaged, and schools will help them do that. So this law is important for a number of reasons. The biggest one, though, is that young people are much less likely to be registered to vote and much less likely to be civically engaged than older demographics. And a lot of times it's not because younger folks and students don't care about issues or don't care about what's happening in our country. I think they just don't know quite what the steps are necessary to take to go and register to vote. So this new law really encourages students to become more engaged with that and to vote at hopefully, the end goal is to have students vote at a higher rate than they're voting right now. Second, the law encourages community participation and civic engagement. It can start with voting, but that can spiral off into all other types of civic engagement, which, as we all know, is really important. One reason that's near and dear to the Disabilities Rights Center's heart is that this new law will hopefully increase the rate of voting for people with disabilities. Right now, there's a pretty statistically significant gap between the population of voters with no disabilities versus people with disabilities. People with disabilities don't vote at the same rate. And as a result, there are millions and millions of lost votes of folks with disabilities that they're just not participating. And because of that, the voices of the disability community aren't heard as loudly as they could. And our Congress is decided by a razor thin margin. Our state house is divided by razor thin margins. And we're talking about, significant numbers of people with disabilities that are sitting on the sidelines and not participating. And if they jumped in and started participating in the electoral process, a whole lot of changes would happen. So how can the Disability Rights Center help? Well, we are happy to provide advice to students and families, of course, if they have questions about this new law. And we're also happy to help educators, through the process as well. So normally we don't provide any sort of legal advice to schools or educators for pretty obvious reasons, because we represent students and families. But in this case, if you're a parent or a student and you're talking with the school and the special education administrator says, I don't know anything about this law, you can have them call our office and we'd be happy to talk with them about the law and about what they're obligated to do and walk them through that process. So that is, something that we are happy to do. And the phone number for our office is below, and at the end of the presentation, my contact information will be posted there as well. So in New Hampshire and in the United States generally, there are 3 requirements to vote, to be eligible to vote. You have to be 18 years old before the next election. You have to be a citizen of the United States, either born or naturalized as a citizen, and you have to reside in the town or city in which you will be voting. And one thing I will point out, it's on the slide, is that New Hampshire does not have any restrictions on people who have a guardian being able to vote. In other words, if you are over the age of 18 years old and or if you have a child that's over the age of 18 years old and you've gone to probate court and gotten a guardianship from the probate court, there's no restriction. The person under guardianship is still able to vote. There's no restrictions on that in New Hampshire law, unlike a lot of other states. So when you go to register to vote, you have to prove those 3 things: age, citizenship, and domicile or residency. So proof of age can be done with a driver's license or a non-driver ID. It's got to be government issued, or a birth certificate. I usually recommend a birth certificate to people if they can get it. If they have it handy, that'd be great. If not, you can get one from the town clerk, pretty easily. Because the birth certificate will prove how old you are, and it'll prove that you're a United States citizen. So you knock off those 2 first requirements pretty easily. And anything else that'll work for citizenship, any sort of naturalization papers, any sort of passport. So you need to show your age, you need to show your citizenship, and last, you have to show that you live where you say you're going to vote. So that can be any number of documents. It could be something issued from a school. It could be any sort of official document sent to you. But if you have any questions, I'd suggest calling your city or town clerk, and they'd be happy to walk you through the process about what is or is not an acceptable proof of residency. But other than that, you bring those documents to the city hall, and you do it a couple weeks before an election. I'd say 2 weeks before an election, you can go to city or town hall, fill out the paperwork, and boom, you're done. You are registered to vote. Your name is going to be on the list on election day. Now, if you're watching this and you realize, oh, geez, the election is a lot closer than 2 weeks away and I'm not registered to vote, that's okay too. In New Hampshire, we have what's called same-day registration, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can register at the polling place on election day. The difference is that you're going to have to bring those documents instead of to city or town hall. You're going to have to bring the necessary documents that is talked about to the polling place on election day and display them. And it can be a little bit longer of a process doing that because there are sometimes multiple people there registering to vote for the first time. It's not a long wait, but it's definitely preferable if you can to register to vote as early as possible, at least 2 weeks before the election. And the reason I say 2 weeks is because the clerks have to print out voter rolls and they have to have a list of all the voters, their names, their addresses, ready to go for election day, and they don't print those out the night before. They usually do that 7 to 10 days before an election. So best practice is to get the city or town hall a couple weeks before the election, get your name on the voter rolls, and you'll be all set. The other thing you can do while you're registering to vote, and you know that you either don't want to go to the polling place on election day because of your disability, or you won't be able to make it there on election day, is you can request an absentee ballot at the same time that you register to vote. And I'm going to talk about absentee ballots a little bit more in a few minutes, but the big thing that you need to remember with absentee ballots is that you have to get them back to the city or town hall or to the polling place by 5 p.m. on election day, or it's not going to count. So like I said earlier, voting with disabilities, voters with disabilities, and promoting voting rights for people with disabilities are, some of the highest priorities that Disability Rights Center has. And I just want to reiterate to everybody watching that, just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't vote. In New Hampshire, the law for developmental services and for people that have intellectual or developmental disabilities, the law specifically says no person shall be deemed incompetent or deprived of their right to vote because of their developmental disability, or if they're, still in school and you're applying for area agency services, don't hesitate to, register to vote to receiving any of those services, or having any disability doesn't prevent you from voting. Like I said a minute ago, a guardian can't take away your right to vote. The court, in only very limited circumstances, can take away your right to vote. And that's only if you've committed voter fraud in the past, pretty much. Other than that, if you have a guardian, if you're over 18 and you have a legal guardian, you can still vote. So don't worry about that. If you have questions about it, please feel free to either contact PIC or contact our office, and we'd be happy to talk with you about that. And voters with communication disabilities are able to vote too, even if you or somebody in your family is nonverbal and unable to express their verbal opinions. That's fine. You're still allowed to vote. The threshold in New Hampshire is being able to effectively communicate a choice to a poll worker or an election official. And effective communication can be something as simple as, tapping your finger, blinking your eyes, or things like that, and answering a yes or no question. So the threshold is really, really low for people to vote. So as long as they are able to express a choice one way or the other through some physical means, that is good enough for the state of New Hampshire, and that will qualify you to vote. There's no competency requirements. There's no intelligence requirements, anything like that. So, anybody can vote in New Hampshire. That's kind of the bottom line here. So like I said a minute ago, there's two ways to vote in New Hampshire. You can vote in person on election day at the polling place. There's certainly a lot of hustle and bustle there. Or the other way to vote is to vote absentee. So absentee voting is also known as voting by mail. And so what you would do is you need to request an absentee ballot ahead of time. One of those ballots before the election, you have to request it. Now you can request it up until the day before the election, or if there's an emergency, say you're in the hospital, say you get hospitalized the day of the election, you can request an absentee ballot that day as well. And, you can call your city or town clerk or town offices and get that sorted out. If you're unable to get one due to an unforeseen event, give our office a call, give the Secretary of State's office a call, and we'll be able to help you out and make sure that you're able to get a ballot on election day. So, but one of the key things about absentee ballots is you have to request one. Some states have vote by mail for everybody, where they send a ballot out to all registered voters. New Hampshire doesn't do that. You have to fill out a form listing the reasons why you cannot vote in person on election day. And when you do that, you'll be sent an absentee ballot. You can fill out the form at City Hall, fill it out right there, and give it back to the clerk the same day. Or you can fill out a form and either mail it back to the city clerk, turn it in to the city or town clerk, and they'll mail one to you, and you can mail it back or drop it off. But the key thing is you have to request one, and you have to make sure that you get it back before 5 p.m. on election day. Some states allow for absentee ballots to be counted if they're postmarked on election day. New Hampshire doesn't have that restriction, or doesn't allow for those late absentee ballots. So The important takeaway is if you're going to vote via absentee ballot, make sure that you mail it in with plenty of time ahead of the election. I would say at least a week before the election if you're going to mail it back. If not, I'd recommend you do what you can to get to your city or town hall and drop off your absentee ballot in person to make sure that it counts. So the other way to vote is in person on election day. And for those of you who are voting for the first time or it's been a while, there's a few things that may be a little bit different and you may not be ready for and might be surprised by. And one of them, especially with these upcoming elections, we have the presidential primary coming up probably in January or February. And then we have primaries in September, and then the big presidential election in November of 2024. Those are going to be really crowded at the polling place. Pretty much whatever time of day you go, it's going to be busy. So expect a crowd there, which is okay. Just be prepared. You may have to wait a little bit. And then once you get there, you're going to walk in, to the building, roll into the building, and you're going to have to show your ID to the person taking collection of the names on the voter registration list. Depending on your town, there may be a bunch of different lines with different letters of your last name, or there may just be one or two if it's a very small town. But you're going to have to bring a photo ID. New Hampshire does have a photo identification requirement. So you need to have a photo ID. It could be a student ID from school. It could be a driver's license. It could be a non-driver's ID. Now, if you don't have a photo ID, what you can do is you can talk with your city or town clerk as soon as possible, and they'll give you a voucher for a voting ID. And you take that voting ID voucher and you go to the DMV, and they'll print you out an identification that is good for use on voting and for election purposes only. So you can't use it to buy beer. You can't use it to do anything like that, to get on an airplane or anything. You can only use it for voting on election day. But the good news is that it's free. And you have the photo ID ahead of time. So that's one of the ways that the state has said, yeah, we have a photo ID requirement, but people shouldn't have to pay money to get a photo ID, shouldn't have to pay any money to vote. So you can get that voucher, get your voter ID from the state DMV, no problem. And if you have any questions about that, again, please contact our office. All right, so you get to the polling place, you show your ID. They're going to check your name off the list, and they're going to give you a ballot. And it is now time to fill out your ballot. You could do it either in a private booth, or you could have somebody come in and help you. And I'm going to talk about the right to voter assistance in just a minute. But once you complete your ballot, you either hand it to the poll worker who will put it into the vote counting machine, or you put it in the vote counting machine yourself, or if some towns still do hand counts, and you put it in the box and it will be hand counted later on in the day. But you are done. You usually get a sticker, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a chance for you to express your civic opinions. Now, when you're voting on election day, you do have a right to accommodations, as people with disabilities often do. The Americans with Disabilities Act and the Help America Vote Act guarantees that people with disabilities are able to vote and are able to vote privately and independently. Voting privately, that's exactly what it sounds like. You have a right to fill out a ballot and not tell anybody who you voted for. You don't have to disclose that. You don't have to tell anybody who you chose to be your candidates. You can if you want, if you can take a selfie of it if you want and post it online. That's fine, but you do have a right to just fill out a ballot privately and not tell anybody. And so, if your parents are telling you, hey, you should vote for this person, but you like the other person better, vote for the other person. It's up to you. You have a right to do that, and you have a right not to tell anybody who you voted for. You also have a right to vote independently. Nobody needs to help you vote. Of course, you can have help if you want to, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the Help America Votes Act guarantees that for federal elections, at least, all voters should be able to vote independently. And they have accommodations in place and ballot marking machines in place to help people with disabilities vote independently without the assistance of others. So generally speaking, all the polling locations in New Hampshire for elections, they are required to be physically accessible. What that means is that they have to have an accessible parking lot. They have to have parking spaces that are clearly designated for people with mobility impairments. The entrance has to be accessible for folks that are using wheels to get in and out of the building. And if it's not the main entrance, there has to be very clear signage to the entrance, the accessible entrance for people to go in and say, take an elevator up the stairs or however they need to get into the building. But bottom line, the path of travel needs to be accessible from the front of the parking lot all the way through the process and, out the door. Inside the polling place, there is a voting machine for people with disabilities that I'll talk about in a sec. There are also other options if people want to fill out a ballot by hand. If, say, they're in a wheelchair or they have some other impairment where they can't get into a private booth, they have tables with big screens that sort of block out everything, and so functionally acts as a booth. Those are available in any polling place on election day throughout the state. And I mentioned it a few times, but New Hampshire has an accessible, it's a voting system for folks that are either blind or have vision impairments, or who maybe have difficulty reading or understanding what's written on a ballot, or maybe have impairments where they're not able to mark a ballot themselves. And we call that the One for All Accessible Voting System. And it's a tablet system that helps people with disabilities complete their ballots. They can either vote with a touch screen, or they can use a keyboard with, there's no mouse, but it's a tablet, it's a keyboard. And as you can see in the picture here, it's a tablet, a keyboard with a printer set up. The keyboard is a very high def keyboard, high visibility keyboard. The tablet is able to change the definition of brightness and darkness and the contrast to help people with low vision. And critically, there is a pair of headphones that goes with the One for All system. So because you can imagine, if somebody is blind or has a significant vision impairment, if they're handed a paper ballot, they're not going to be able to read it. They're not going to know where to mark it. They're not going to know how to fill it out. And so they're going to have somebody else do it for them. And like I said a few minutes ago, you have a right to vote privately and a right to vote independently, which means you don't have to tell people who you're voting for. So the solution is this One for All system. And so people will, you go into the polling place and you can request it. And you just tell the person as you check in and you show your ID, you say, I'd like to use the accessible voting system, or I'd like to use the One for All, or I'd like to use a tablet. That's all fine. And they'll give you the same paper ballot everybody else uses. The only difference is that, you'll go into a larger booth that has accessible signage, and it's got the printer in it, and the One for All should be up and running. And so you go in, you make your selections, it will read back, or you can, if you're able to see, you can look at your selections again, you confirm, the candidates that you voted for, and then it will print out on the same ballot that everybody else uses. Now, it used to be that the One for All system printed out on just a plain piece of paper, which looked a lot different than everybody else's ballot. It had to be counted separately. And so if only one or two people in your town used the One for All system, it'd be very clear who voted for who, and you lose that privacy. So the Secretary of State's office has made some changes, and the One for All system now prints out on the same ballot that everybody else uses. The big caveat with the One for All is currently it's only available in federal elections, and that means statewide elections. So think about the governor, United States senators, Congress people, the president. In those big elections, like the presidential elections and the midterms in their respective primaries, the One for All system is going to be available to use in every polling place across the state. No matter how big or how small, it's going to be available. For local elections, though, there's only two municipalities in the state that have the One for All, and that is Concord, New Hampshire, and Exeter, New Hampshire. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but and I'd be happy to talk with anybody if you have questions about why the One for All is not available in local elections, and if you'd like to help try to advocate to make sure that it is available in all elections, that would be great. And please contact me, and I'd be happy to talk with you about the various reasons why and what people can do to try to advocate to get an accessible voting system available in every single precinct for every single election. But right now, it will be available in, what I call the big elections, the statewide elections. So if the governor's on the ballot or if the Congress people on the ballot, it's going to be available. So I talked about the one for all system. Now, say you're not quite comfortable using the one for all, even though I totally recommend it. It's a tablet, it's fun to use. And on an election like the presidential election, it's going to be a lot faster because you're not going to have to wait for a ballot booth or for a booth to open up to fill out your ballot, because usually there's not too many people that are using that one for all. And it doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. It's called the one for all because, well, everybody can use it. So I totally recommend people try it out and get to use the one for all. It helps out people with disabilities across the board. But say you don't want to use the one for all, you want to fill out a paper ballot. If you have difficulty marking the ballot yourself, or you have difficulty reading, and again, you don't want to use the headphones or anything like that, what you can do is you can have somebody come in to help you out. And that can be anybody that you want, with the exception of your boss, if you're working, or if you're in a union, you cannot have a union representative come in and help you out. Other than that, anybody that you would like to have help you out, it could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be a friend. They don't have to live in the same town. They don't have to be old enough to vote. They don't have to speak English. It's just anybody you want to help you vote, you're allowed to do that. If you don't have anybody that is with you when you're going to vote, that's okay too. A poll worker will help you out and fill out your ballot. And in either case, what you're going to have to do is when you go and check in and you show your ID and you get your name checked off the list and they give you your ballot, you're going to have to tell the poll worker that you require assistance with voting. And the poll worker is going to ask, okay, well, do you have somebody that's going to help you, or do you want somebody to help? And either way, they're going to have to, the person that's going to help you is going to have to take an oath and swear that they're going to fill out the ballot just like you want it filled out. So don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. Other than that, other than, swearing in, there's really not much to it. And, I'd recommend anybody who's a little bit skittish about filling out their own ballot, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's why poll workers are there. So if you don't have somebody with you, there's plenty of other people there that are able to help. Now, if you decide that you want to fill out your own ballot and you're filling it out and you make a mistake, most common mistake is what's called overvoting. So say you're voting for the governor and you're allowed to pick one of, two candidates. Well, what happens if you accidentally fill in both candidates? That's a mistake. And if you put it in the vote counting machine, it's going to get spat back out. And that your vote for that race won't count. So if that happens and you realize that you make a mistake, that's okay. What you do is you take your ballot and you tell the poll worker, hey, listen, I've made a mistake. And they'll bring it over to the moderator. The moderator will put a big old X through that first ballot, give you a new one. And you're allowed to do that up to 3 times, just like baseball. 3 strikes and you're out. So if you make mistakes again on the second ballot, that's okay too. Just bring it back and say that you need a new ballot. But that third ballot's the last one you're going to get. So if you're marking it, make sure you mark it correctly. And if you make a mistake on that one, and you put it in the machine and say it spits back out and says overvoting, you're going to have to decide whether or not you want your ballot to be counted for all the other races and all the other candidates that are not overvoted or don't have mistakes on them, or if you just don't want your ballot to count at all. And so I'd always recommend to folks, it's better to vote for most races and, have 1 or 2 mistakes on the ballot than to not vote at all. But, that's your choice to make. But 3 strikes, you're out. So make sure if you make mistakes on 2 ballots, be extra careful on that 3rd ballot. If you run into a problem voting on election day, or if, you have an issue with the election official, or if, say, you want to use the one for all system and it's not set up properly, I'd highly recommend that you call the Secretary of State's office. Their number is right here, and I think the slides are going to be made available after this presentation. So, just jot that number down. I'm sure that anybody at the polling place that's working there will have the Secretary of State's number. They run a hotline on election day. Alternatively, you could call the Disability Rights Center. I'll be sitting right here by the phones on every election day, waiting for calls. And, truth be told, most likely thing I'll tell you is to call the Secretary of State's office and give you their number. If you're not comfortable doing that, I can call the Secretary of State's for you. But the reason I say call the Secretary of State's office is because, number one, they run the elections in the state, so they're able to fix things. And number two, they want to hear from people with disabilities more than me. They hear from me plenty, but they want to hear directly from folks who are having issues during voting. And if they don't hear about issues and they don't know about issues, then they're not going to be able to fix them. So there's no shame in calling them up, saying, hey, I'm having a problem with X, Y, or Z on election day. And they can help you remedy that solution. Finally, I'm just going to go through a few best tips and pro tips and best practices for everybody. Before you go to vote, remember to bring your ID. We do have photo ID in New Hampshire. Like I said, if you don't have a photo ID, you can get one for free. Talk to your town or city clerk about it. They'll give you that voucher to get one printed up at the DMV. Second one, and this is a big one, is vote in every election. Local elections are really important, and the turnout rate is really, really low. So what that means is that your vote essentially counts for more. If there's a big election and 100 people turn out, well, your vote is 1 out of 100. If there's a small election and 10 people turn out, your vote is 1 out of 10. So your vote gets exponentially more powerful when you're voting in these local elections. And I usually tell people, if they have trouble remembering why voting in local elections is important, I talk about the movie Jaws. In the movie Jaws, there's a mayor. The mayor decides to keep the beaches open, despite all the experts saying, don't keep the beaches open, don't keep the beaches open. He doesn't listen to the experts. He does a bad job. A bunch of people get eaten. Well, 4 years later, Jaws 2 comes out, and the mayor is still in office. And he's still in office, even though he should have been voted out, because nobody remembered to vote in their local elections. So local elections have huge consequences in the real world. If you look at what's going on in Congress these days, it's a clown show, no matter who's running it, right? Democrats, Republicans, doesn't really matter. It's a big mess. And, the laws that they pass are important, but the laws that are passed in your local community are really important and are really going to impact you on a day-to-day basis. Things like, how much are taxes going to be put towards education? What's the school budget going to look like? Who's going to be on the school board? What kind of decisions are they going to make? What kind of policies are they going to implement? These are things that can really have an effect on you and your family. So, take that into account. One of the things that I always recommend to people before an election is to research candidates. It's important to know who's on the ballot, who you're going to be voting for. There's a lot of great information online. For the bigger races like Congress and the Senate and the president, Ballotpedia has a lot of great information there. And there are a lot of other, nonprofit websites that do candidate surveys and things like that. And one other place you can go is, candidate websites, even for like state house races or city council races. A lot of these candidates are putting together their own websites because they're pretty easy to do, and they'll have contact information on there. And I'd strongly recommend anybody, before you vote for, a local candidate, check out their website, do some research, but reach out to those candidates. They want to talk to you, and, it's going to have an effect because, number one, it's going to make clear to them that, people in the disability community want to have these issues addressed. And number two, it's going to make clear to them that what you want to do, what's important to you, should be important to them as well. And, again, don't be shy about reaching out to them. They're running for public office. They want to talk to you. They want to hear from you. So, it's better to reach out to a candidate directly and talk to them. Most of them are very, very responsive. I will caution people about political advertisements and believing everything that you see on TV or on social media posts or on YouTube or things like that. I'm always hesitant to, whenever I hear the phrase, do your own research, but in this case, it really is important to do your own research and make sure that you understand the positions that are important to you and where the candidates stand on those issues. If you take nothing else away from this presentation, biggest thing is to make a plan to vote. Get registered to vote, figure out how you're going to get registered. I explained in the beginning that new law that was introduced last year. If you're voting for an absentee, if you want to use an absentee ballot to vote, make sure you request your ballot now, as soon as you can, and make sure that you have a plan to get it back in time. Like I said, if you're going to mail it back, give yourself at least a week to get that absentee ballot back to the polling place or back to City Hall. Otherwise, it may arrive late and your vote won't count. If you're going to be voting in person, make sure that you know where you're going to vote. They're all listed either on your city or town websites, or the Secretary of State's office has a list of all the polling places throughout the state. So know where you're going to vote and know how you're going to get to the polling place. There are a lot of transportation options available, especially for bigger elections. A lot of ride-sharing apps like Lyft and Uber will offer discounted rates to people going to the polling place. A lot of political parties like the Democrats and Republicans have fleets of volunteers that are willing to shuttle people to and from the polling place. So if your transportation is going to be an issue and you know it is, you may want to think about voting absentee, or if you definitely want to vote in person on election day, make sure you square away that transportation ahead of time so that it's not an issue at the last minute. The last thing that I just want to go over real quick is a cheap plug for Disabilities Rights Center. We put together a voting toolkit, which should be available with this presentation. It's free online. It's easy to understand. It's written in pretty simple language. It goes through the voting process, your voting rights. It has really important contact information. So, take a look at that toolkit and, feel free to share it out as far and as wide as you'd like. And then the last thing is, if you have any questions or any concerns about your voting rights, please contact Disability Rights Center. Please contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody about it. And yeah, I think that's all I had for my presentation, but thank you for watching, and make sure you make a plan to vote. Thanks.